Good morning, everyone. You are a long way back there. Back row, you're welcome to come on up front. And I told them to please not put my picture up there, but rather put slides on both, partly because I wander, and I know that videographer is going to be really glad to not be following me across the stage. At any rate, they are connecting up my slides. So are there any educators in the room? Any people who are current teachers? I know everybody's probably an educator at one point, but current teachers, other people? Glad to see you. And I won't have you stand up because you'll be swarmed by your people around here that would love to spend some time chatting with you. All right, so here we go. Climbing over the digital rainbow. There you go. That was the title actually EdNET came up with. So the creative minds there got us started. So yes, 17 years in public education, then spent some time at corporate, and then moved on to government. 3.5 years at the U.S. Department of Education, heading up the Office of Education Technology. It was quite an experience, quite a learning opportunity. So what I'm going to do is go through some slides, kind of talk through kind of a storyline where I see things today, and I know much of this is how you also see it. I had some wonderful conversations yesterday, so you may find me stealing from those of you in the room who even said things yesterday. So I'll try to give credit where credit is due. At any rate, great to be here. Great to see you all. We will have time at the end for questions. So there's microphones on either side, and we will be able to hopefully have some interaction at the end. So as you think of things, feel free to tee those up. Okay, so President Obama, Secretary Duncan, people on both sides of the aisle, all sorts of people really do understand now that education is an urgent national priority. That doesn't mean that anybody is agreeing on how to do things, what to do, from the state level, from the federal level, from the local level, even from the school and teacher level. It's a very confused space, but this urgent message, this high national priority of making sure that every single person is educated in order to give them a productive future is something I think we all can agree on. So the other thing I think we can agree on, and something that we don't necessarily always point to, is there is a ton of excellence in education right now. We have examples everywhere. And as you travel, as you work with your customers, please be curating those examples. Be able to talk about them. Be able to tell people, this is what's happening and it's happening everywhere. Rather than saying things like, well, we don't, there's a lot of problems, everybody's dropping out, and we don't, people don't know how to use technology, there's no planning being done, etc. Find those places, keep those in your mind, and begin to project those to everybody you meet. So let's think about this. President Obama actually recently went to Mooresville, and maybe many of you are tired about hearing about Mooresville, and the question I get from people everywhere is, well, where else besides Mooresville can we see these kinds of gains? The interesting thing about Mooresville, and kind of the first message today, Dr. Edwards is unbelievably good at data. He's good at talking about data, talking about numbers. They have captured this data for all the years that he's been there, so they can show growth. Not just achievement, because we all know that's a spotty thing to talk about, but we can talk about scholarships. How many scholarships did students have once they had access and could actually find them? How many students graduated? What about behavior notices and attendance? What are the kinds of things? What is all the data that you can be capturing, gathering, that your customers can be capturing and gathering in order to tell a positive story long term? Really important, because this is exactly what Dr. Edwards has done, and this is why he is sort of this spotlight. It's why the president decides to go there to launch a big program. The second thing we're seeing all over the place, engaged kids in robotics, in design, in coding, in following challenges, in working with peers, either close by in their classroom or around the world. Many places these really interesting kinds of things are happening. We're also seeing some fabulous teachers engaging students in art and music and filmmaking, photography, design, the kinds of things that we know are incredibly important for STEM professionals, for web professionals, for people in across the board. The notion of the arts, the notion of this ability to be creative and design is important for all of us in this room and for this next generation of students for sure. We're also seeing young children learning all sorts of things, exploring language and mathematics, reading interactive books online, reading on their tablets. Many young children interacting with these kinds of things. Many apps that even Montessori says are okay for young children to be using. So many things to figure out what's working, what's not, but we do see many successful stories about expanding literacy and expanding mathematics with young children. So I think we should be clear. The problem with American education is not a lack of excellence. There is excellence everywhere. And we also know that technology does create huge opportunities to learn. We know that mobile is changing everything. The students can take that mobile device, fit it in their backpack, rip out all those textbooks and things that are heavy and static and kind of old, and put in a tablet with much more dynamic, interactive content, and the opportunity to take that with them on the bus, at home, at school, at the library, at the local coffee shop, or wherever. We also know that social interactions are incredibly important. Yesterday, Lisa Schmucke talked about, on her 30 minutes, she talked about the U.S. Department of Education running Connected Educator Month next month. So this notion of highly connected educators, people who are very good at finding resources, finding experts, working with others. The recent Pew study about, and actually was a study that interviewed AP teachers and teachers involved in the National Writing Project. There was some really interesting data there, but one of the ones that stuck out for me was 99% of them said yes, they use the internet to do research to find information for their classroom. 99%. And yes, these are high-end teachers, but I think that we're seeing that swing so that teachers are much more competent at leveraging the kinds of technologies that can help them than they have been. And I think students also, this notion of creating a highly connected learning environment where everybody is a learner, everybody's reaching out to experts and to find the kinds of things that they need to help them solve the problems every single day. And the big data, the new pathways, new ways of understanding the data associated with all of the things that we do and how we can actually use that data to answer research questions. It has been in the past that we create a research question, then figure out how to collect enough data to actually help answer that question. Now we can sort of also, yes and, flip it over, right? We also have very large data sets, and we can begin to engage data scientists and researchers to say, what kinds of questions could we ask of this data? How can we understand more about what's going on by leveraging some of this information that we have coming from the use of our tools and resources? And finally, much more highly produced digital content. The quality and quantity of digital content is growing exponentially every day. So how can we make sure that we're leveraging all of that? Much of this content is free and open and available and reusable. Those are the kinds of opportunities that you all have to leverage as you build better and much improved products and services. So those are some of the trends. So what we know is that the impact of digital technology on learning is probably going to be greater than that of the printing press. So if we go way back to the beginning of time, people learned from other people, the oral tradition, talking to each other, passing things on from generation to generation. Then came mathematics, the beginning of math symbols and the kinds of things, the language of mathematics. Graphics and hieroglyphics and those things kind of came next. This is a fly through history. Written language next, and there's a timeline down there. It's definitely not visually correct. But what was interesting in the 1400s, when the printing press was developed and created and began to be used, that was the beginning of mass publishing and the opportunity for people to now still learn from other people, but also learn from books. And the advent of literacy and the notion that if everybody can learn to read, everybody can learn from these wonderful books that are being published. But now we have this whole new thing, and that is digital technologies. Frank Catalano said yesterday, he just wrote a piece that it's the 20-year anniversary of Mosaic, right? So the first graphic interface that represented the internet. And that's just 20 years ago. So if we think about that, it's incredibly a fast-moving trajectory that has spread around the world, and many more people being able to take advantage of this. So it definitely has more impact on learning than the printing press. So technology changes everything. Can't have a presentation without talking about the quantity of information. This is a gorgeous picture of the inside of the Library of Congress. The first day of a baby's life, there's 70 times, if I get this right, the amount of data generated by humanity is equivalent to 70 times all the information that is contained in the Library of Congress. So again, just keeping that in mind every single day. My daughter is in college, and we were talking this weekend about her courses, and it's just incredible to me that they're all based on kind of very rudimentary listening, learning, reading something, and taking a test. It's just mind-boggling that people can still think, if I just tell you some stuff, then you will have learned this topic, history. Like, really? That's crazy. Or things like, linguistics, memorizing learning how to write the phonetic word that you find in the dictionary in the phonetic format. I'm not entirely sure that's helpful, but anyway. So what we do know is we can't any longer learn. I don't know when we actually could, but you absolutely cannot learn all of that there is to be learned in the plethora of topics that you touch in school. But what we do know is that all of these 21st century skills, deeper learning skills, the 4 C's, whatever you want to call them, the critical thinking, communication, problem solving, this ability to learn, that is the currency of the 21st century. Knowledge, what you know, is not the currency. Being able to do something with that, analyze, and those kinds of things, that is the currency. So whatever you're doing, think about those things and how what your products are, what your services are, advance this opportunity to learn so that everybody can actually begin to develop in a much more robust fashion this notion of being a lifelong learner. So technology, so you all know this. I'm just going to go through this anyway because I think this is something that we need to just keep reminding customers, because many times when I get out there, I hear a lot of people saying, it makes your backpack lighter, like a single thing, or you can have digital textbooks, right? So a digital textbook, a PDF, or just a representation of the print in digital is actually not that helpful. So what are the kinds of things? First of all, students, when they have their own personal device, they can use the tools the pros use. A 4th grader can use the same search engine, the same word processor, the same email program that the wealthiest person in the world uses, right? So this notion that using the tools the pros use is incredibly powerful. And a lot of times we never think about that. That's kind of, oh yeah, and that stuff too. Really powerful. This came home to me working with some students on the John Lennon bus last year when they were producing music, and they realized suddenly this iPad connected to a guitar and being recorded, that was technology they actually had, and that was the same way the Black Eyed Peas recorded their music. And they were like, that's kind of crazy. And so that's a really important thing. The advent of better and better explanations, visualizations, simulations, animations of complex concepts. You all have many examples of that. Accessibility, making sure your products and services are accessible, right? So people who are blind, people who have other disabilities can actually interact with the product because it's been made accessible out of the box. Really important. Feedback loops, adaptive environments, you know a lot about that. The notion that you can use primary source documents and books that are in the public domain. These are the kinds of things, again, that everybody has access to. Access to experts, expertise. This notion of being able to be globally connected and work with people around the world. Gaining new perspectives as you get out of as a student, you get out of your sort of small world of your community and begin to understand more about what's happening and perspectives from around the world. And finally, the thing we all have been talking a lot about is personalized learning. So when we think about personalized learning, it's not just individualized. Many times people think personalized learning and they're like, you put kids in headphones and they all can do math at their own pace. That's actually very helpful in some circumstances. But we also want to make sure it's differentiated, that we have a variety, a growing wealth of strategies that can be used to solve the problems of how to teach this student mathematics or this student literacy or whatever. Add to that the ability to much more fully invest and respond to students' interests and preferences and stories. Who are you as a community member? Who are you as a family member? That's the third part of personalized learning. And it's these things together that make this kind of new, more powerful opportunity to learn. Schools that are using project-based learning, they outgrow their school library in a day, right? So the ability to get out of your school and be able to leverage the entire internet, not just when you have your lab time down the hall or when that thing rolls into the classroom, but every student, every day, their own device, their own questions, their own music, their own video, their own everything. It's this personalized device that we need to make sure that we are putting in the hands of every student. And we know that there's also this growing wealth of opportunities to learn. New MOOCs, new free open online courses. Some of you might see this as a bit of a competition, but how do you leverage these things? How do we look at what's happening? How do we make sure these are actually continuously improving as well? And some of the learnings and the designs and the developments from these courses can find their way into other environments. So one of the things that we all need to do is become much better at learning from each other, learning from the R&D that's happening, and be able to leverage those kinds of things. And also learning from each other. So peer-to-peer university, unconferences, this new ability for people to teach each other. That's kind of another form of expertise and something that's incredibly valuable. And it's also kind of represents that long tail. There might be 500 other people interested in this thing that you're interested in. But again, this ability to teach each other is powerful. So some of you might have heard me talk about this before, but this notion that we all know what a global positioning system is. We have them in our cars, we use them, et cetera. So GPS is obviously a powerful tool. And so what we've been talking about is the notion of a learning positioning system. And can we actually create this? And what is required for all of you to be leveraging an environment like a learning positioning system? So we see learning mathematics, for example. This is obviously a very simplistic diagram of mathematics, but from basic to advanced. You also can then think about this notion of being able to zoom in, right? So you can zoom in on, say, arithmetic, and begin to see the kinds of things that are involved there. And then you can begin to attach to that the kinds of tools, resources, people explaining things. Why do I need to learn this, right? How is it used in the real world? The kinds of things that you can begin attaching to this notion of a learning positioning system or a map of learning progressions is quite powerful. The other thing then you can think about is students with their own profile. So whether they're learning with this math program or that math program or something free online, wherever it is they're learning those kinds of things, if they can begin to collect that data and understand what's happening, they can have their own personal learning profile and take that away with them. So for all of this, data really is the rocket fuel that's going to allow these innovations to take hold. So some people say, oh, data, that's not what's important, it's people. And I would include in the data the ability to observe people, to interact with people. How do we capture what's happening in the classroom? How do we create this environment where teachers are actually re-engaging as researchers in their classroom? It's something that's incredibly important. And this notion of data and observation and information is the rocket fuel that's going to take us into the future to keep us from being kind of stopped. So when we think about data, there are multiple kinds of data. One of the things that's important is to think about open data sets. So if you think these are the two most well-known, right? So you have weather data. So the NOAA weather data is what enables you to find the weather today on your smartphone, because apps and environments, internet websites of the 10-day forecasts and such, the Weather Channel, all of these things are fueled by the open data provided to us all by NOAA and other places. So that's actually really important. Also, likewise, the NASA data that's allowed the global positioning systems to actually work. There's this other kind of data that's what we've been calling the My Data initiative. And that's giving people their own data so that they can power their own learning. I was talking with Todd Breckus yesterday about his product and the ability that the students have to get their own information back immediately, right? That's really important for them to have their own information many times. And think about the products that you have. Does the data go to the student, or does the data go to the teacher? Or does it just go to the system? Does it kind of fly over and kind of drop into the district, and then maybe it trickles to down to the school, and then finally maybe to the parent, maybe never, maybe sometimes to the student? This notion that students can have their own data so they know what's going on is really important. And there are lots of applications of this, but you can begin to start kind of imagine what those would be. So it's this whole notion of incorporating a My Data button into whatever your product is so that students can begin to download that and have access to their own data. Michael J. has been worked on this whole notion of interoperability for ages, and I know many of you have. It's been a frustrating space in education. It's really a tough thing to figure out, but we have to stay the course and figure out interoperability standards so that you actually can better connect your systems with other systems. That's a big, huge conversation that we could spend a long time talking about. So somebody yesterday, too, and I apologize, I don't remember who it was, talked about grit and the grit factor. This is actually an emerging area that's really also important. What are the ways that the learning environment supports the development of persistence, the development of these mindsets that help you as a learner persist? Part of it's having your own information, having your own data, having these powerful tools in your hands, having access to the whole internet. The kinds of things we all need to think every day about what are those tools and products and services that can help students become persistent learners. And that means empowered. So it isn't sitting there and waiting to be told what to do for the next 20 minutes in little 20-minute increments or even 50-minute increments. It's about true empowerment. And we need to learn much more about the kinds of things that actually do develop persistence. But this is a really important part of the work that we're doing. At the U.S. Department of Education, we actually launched a draft paper, which is somewhat academic, but it's still interesting, that is kind of the state of the state right now with regard to persistence and tenacity and grit. So this notion of having this learning positioning system, having the data that I need to have the information about my own learning, developing this persistent mindset and this ability to learn. And actually, I'll say one more thing about this. If we think about the plethora of MOOCs and other open learning environments, the free spaces online, the people that we see taking most advantage of those are the people who are actually already sort of learned, right? They've already had some success. So how do we make sure that we're setting way more students up for lifelong learning success? That's the goal, making sure that every student graduates with this deep ability to continue learning. So what we've been thinking about is that the problem with education in America is not this lack of excellence, but it is a lack of equity. These pockets of excellence are absolutely not evenly distributed. There are some amazing things happening, and you're going to hear from people like Diane Tavener and Andy Calkins and others who have these amazing things that are going on in schools. They're figuring this out. They're figuring out how to create these environments where students can begin to learn these habits of mind, these mindsets that help them persist. They're doing deep projects. They're collaborating with other people. But we need to figure out how to scale these things up. All of these programs that are like, and next year we'll do 3 more schools, and the following year we'll do 5 schools, not going to get us there, not going to get us to scale. We have to figure out how to leverage the entire internet in order to build a very scalable solution that helps many more people get to a place of advanced learning environments much faster. So what we do think is this lack of equity is fueled by the digital learning gap. So the digital learning gap is probably consists of things you've thought about for a long time. So first, it is the lack of access. lack of broadband access, lack of a personal device. It's also fueled by this lack of participation. So many people who can actually get access should they want to, broadband goes by their house, by their school, whatever, but they don't participate. They might not know how, they might not be able to afford it, but there are things that we can get at to improve participation. There's an estimated 100 million Americans right now, that's a third of Americans, who are not connected, are not participating in this globally networked society. So how do we think about that? And third is the lack of empowering use, and this is really in our schools, right? So I guess it originates in schools. But it's people who use their technology for entertainment and kind of light communications, and other people who use their technology for powered-up learning. They're constantly looking things up. If they have a health problem, they know how to get online and figure that out. Financial, monitoring and the like. There's a powered-up use and there's a light use, and this is this whole notion of different kinds of use, and that's something we have to think through. So improving access, we know we have to move from the lab down the hall to in the classroom to the 24/7. We have got to get to where every single student and every teacher has their own personal learning device so that they can be actually connected. Second is for improving participation, we need to improve this digital literacy. Common Sense Media has a fabulous digital driver's license, and they're developing curriculum. They have developed and launched curriculum that helps people become more digitally literate. This is important. It's information literacy. How do I know where this information comes from, what it is, where it came from, all those kinds of things. There's media literacy. How do I interact really well online? How do I comment intelligently? We all could use a little bit of that. How do we make sure that the videos we post have the right rights and such? And then citizenship, privacy, data security, behaving well online. Many things kind of fall into the bucket of digital citizenship. But these three things together are kind of the domain of digital literacy. And in order to improve participation, we've got to figure out how to make sure that everybody's digitally literate from a young age. And so today it means all of our teachers, our administrators, our parents, community members, students. We need this kind of pervasive digital literacy campaign. And then finally, improving the use of technology in our schools, making sure that we aren't using technology just for drill and practice, just for kind of this unempowered use, but rather we're using it to engage students in deeper learning experiences, solve challenges, do creative and critical thinking. We need students to develop really good questioning strategies. Many times it's the teachers who ask the questions and the students who answer them. How do we make sure we develop this culture of questioning, researching, finding things out, wondering, curiosity, developing this very purposefully, the better and better questioning strategies. So again, this fuels this sense of participation, lifelong learning. And finally, how do we make sure that all of our students know how to learn from online environments? I am not a fan, actually, of these kind of statewide requirements of requiring everybody to take 2 online courses before they graduate, because it puts the strategy before the goal, right? So what we need is the goal of everybody to be able to learn online, but in some cases, those courses that are online courses today may or may not be better than the other alternative, which might be a person locally that can teach something. We have to figure out how to get students to know how to learn online, but we need continuously improving in better and better environments so that it is actually supporting their learning. So, improving access, improving participation, and improving use. That's how we will close this digital learning gap. So digital promise. So I have a little more than 30 seconds, I think. I heard you all yesterday, but I will tell you kind of what digital promise is. We have a very high mission in this congressionally authorized nonprofit organization to spur innovation to advance the opportunity to learn for all Americans. So it's just a wee little mission. But what we really have done is kind of focus in on this notion of this digital learning gap and how do we close this digital learning gap by 2020. So what we're doing is investing at the intersections of educators, researchers, and entrepreneurs and developers. The kinds of things that begin to mash people up, mash ideas up, bring people together, solve problems by connecting these groups and the intelligence that's inherent in all three of them. Taken apart, amazing things that we know from all three groups, and how can we better connect folks together. So we're kind of focusing on people, and we're focusing on strategies. So district leadership, we'll talk a little bit about that. We're focusing on teachers, entrepreneurs and developers, education consumers, the people in the education space that are doing the purchasing, researchers. How do we expand the ability of our researchers to communicate effectively, and so that we all can take advantage of the learnings about learning. And finally, adults. So we sort of have this sort of constituent strategy, and we're kind of looking at these 4 areas of engagement. Broad communication and outreach is one. Working on something we're calling the Challenge Institute is another. Working on this notion, and I'm going to steal this from Frank Catalano, this notion of micro-credentialing that is presented as open badges. So every time I talk about we're going to be working on badges, people look at me like the Boy Scouts, like the Girl Scouts, or whatever. But this is really a sort of a high-end, high-tech way of thinking about micro-credentialing and the kinds of things that teachers can actually take away with them. And then finally, research. Research is incredibly important, and we'll be talking about that. So we'll be launching something called Learnings from the League. Many of you know of the League of Innovative Schools. It's 40 superintendents who are kind of in this close-knit club, doing some amazing things, working across with researchers and entrepreneurs and developers and the educators in their districts. So the League of Innovative Schools will be beginning to publish out much more about what's happening there. This notion of teacher badges, being able to support teachers in getting credentials that mean something about what they are learning, how they are advancing their knowledge and skills, and many other things. So the last thing I'll say is that research is actually really important, and there's 3 parts to this. First of all is the basic research on learning. So we want to help figure out how the kinds of things that researchers have learned already about how people learn is much more readily accessible to entrepreneurs and developers, to all of you, to educators. So working to figure out how to publish these things in a much more accessible format for general consumption is one. Really, really important. We hope that everybody creating products can name what is the basic research that your product or service is based on. It's a good test for all of you. Second is research and development. Better processes, more iterative processes. We'll talk about that in a second. And finally, evaluation research. How do we make sure that this isn't just an end of the day, like, yep, that works, that doesn't work. We know in technology that is not the way this actually works. So we've been thinking about this, and this is sort of a very simplistic model, but thinking about how it's much more of a spiraling up of products that people are designing and developing. So people have an idea, they want to rapidly build something so that they can prototype it, right? This notion of rapid prototyping. Getting something out there so that you can quickly collect data, observation data, see how people engage with this, evaluate that, consider what's happening, and rinse and repeat, right? So this notion that this is an iterative process, that things change and get better, and it improves over time. We need to figure out how our evaluation research is not end of the day. This is what I think about this. This is how this worked. This is the results of this product. Done. Yes, it works. No, it doesn't. But rather, here's what we learned from this evaluation study. Let's use that to make it better and better and better. So there definitely are emerging practices we can learn from the consumer industry and other spaces where they have to continuously improve in order to stay alive. And I would say that's also what we all need to do. So this iterative process, research and development, is important. There is one other paper I would point you to. It's called Expanding Evidence Approaches for Learning in a Digital World. You can find it at the U.S. Department of Education Office of Ed Tech website. It was published right before I left in February, and it's kind of chock full of new ideas of how we do expand our evidence approaches because we now have this digital environment. So one example of this is the work that Zoran Popovic has done up at the University of Washington. He has many examples, but one of them is this game called Refraction that he's created. And when I talked to him about this, I think over a year ago, he said, so I created this game, I need to get 250,000 people using it fast, right? And the reason was because he created this game, but he didn't really know if it would be successful or not, if it would help people learn fractions, if it would help them level up and get to the next level of understanding, until he had a lot of people using it. So that's an example of how he was thinking about this notion of constant improvement and iteration. So we know technology is not going away, so we certainly are not still in the debate about should we or shouldn't we leverage technology for education, but rather how do we enhance and improve and transform our learning environments so that everybody can leverage the power of technology to be lifelong learners. So finally, and then we'll kind of stop and ask a few questions, just a few last minute sort of call to action. First, laser focus on measured outcomes. So if you can come up with a wide variety of ways that you can talk about the progress, that's going to be really powerful. It is powerful. People listen to those things. Too often we say it's only about test scores, and we all know it absolutely is not just about test scores. There's lots of other really important things, like do we get kids to come back to school after lunch? Second, we need to hone our ability to read data, observe users, and continuously improve. Third, use basic research on learning. And fourth, consider building in a My Data button to support your customer, who at the end of the day is the student. And so with that, I'll stop talking and open it up for questions. Microphones on either side. Questions, comments, thoughts, ideas, things that you have or you're doing. And Frank, yes, you're first. Thank you.
I have to ask about the wow, that's loud. Sorry, it's early. I have to ask about the My Data button concept. What kind of uptake are you seeing among the industry for that, and how hard is it to implement that in a way that's both secure and useful? Yeah, so first of all, we're actually seeing a lot, which is not very quantifiable. I know, sorry. That was good. A lot. Next question? No. But one really interesting thing about this, and so everybody's worried about data security, and what's interesting about this, and people think about FERPA for very good reasons. FERPA, COPPA, SEPA, those are the three, you should know those, I'm sure you do. But what is interesting is that the ability for students to download their own data, that's completely legal. It doesn't violate privacy because it is their data inherently, first and foremost. So that's okay. And then students can mash that data up with other data sets. So that's different than trying to figure out how to share your data with another third party. That's a little thornier with respect to FERPA. But giving students their own data is legal. The security issues are critical. So one of the things that we're definitely thinking about in terms of your products is also talking. So there's the question about basic research. There's also the question about data security and how you do secure your data and make sure that it is this privacy is held. I actually can't quantify, though, the amount of uptake, but we've definitely seen some very interesting implementations of this.
Karen, I have to confess that when we were planning this session, we were talking about some things that you might talk about, and you said, well, that would be a great question, so not to cover in your...
Did I change everything in a month from now?
So here's the question that we were talking about at that point. Now that you're out of government, what can you tell us about the realities of that world in terms of moving U.S. K-12 education and technology ahead? Is it a morass of competing agendas and interest groups? Is the funding just a drop in the bucket compared to what's needed to move the needle? What are the bright spots? And what's your advice to the product and service vendor community.
Yeah.
You said you'd be happy to talk about that.
I was on the phone at the time, like, sure, that sounds great. It's a month from now. No, what's interesting about it is now that I am out of government, I actually can talk about it. That's one thing. But, I'll tell you, a few learnings. One is that I would say, to the number, everything people are doing is from the right place. It's based on what they think is going to work. It's based on lots of input and interaction and ideas. So, sometimes it might seem like things just kind of pop out of the blue, but there is a deep level of interaction and conversation about every single policy decision and decision that happens. What I will say is then add politics, and it is crazy making. And the way that, and it's sad actually, because the way that things can get twisted and turned as they hit sort of general public, I think Common Core is actually one of those things right now that is really quite interesting. The articulation of what students need to know and be able to do is something, again, that can continuously improve and evolve. But what we do know is having, 50 different sets that all were different and some were very basic and some were higher level, that actually wasn't a winning scheme. So whether you call it college and career ready standards, you call it Common Core, you call it, old standards. I mean, I know there were some places where they did not call it Common Core. They said, these are our state standards. We're not using Common Core, but you read them and there's like a few words that are different. Whatever, it doesn't matter. The point is, we all need to get to that higher level and say, what are we trying to accomplish? We're trying to accomplish improving the opportunity to learn, and articulating what our students need to know and be able to do is absolutely a critical element. This whole conversation about, anyway, sorry, I could go on about this, so I won't. So that's, I would say, one thing. I think in terms of the funding, as we think about technology, it is an integral part to everything students do all day long. I do think the old Title II-D that was cut out before I got there, by the way. But at any rate, what we lost from that was the ability to try new things and innovate. So that was actually kind of that was a difficult move. However, it did cause us to go to every single funding stream and make sure that they were technology friendly. So whether you're trying to improve special education or Title I or Title II, which is all about professional development, all those things, all of those should be places that you can go to find funding for the kinds of things you're designing and developing. So there is a lot of money out there, and federal money is like 9% of the whole pot. So there is a lot of money out there to spend on every student's education. And I would say that a device in the hands of every student needs to be a base. I also would say that the new E-rate modernization and the work that was launched on Connect Ed is also incredibly helpful. The E-rate modernization could get us to having broadband access, so not just internet access, but broadband access in all of our schools. I know it's really a complex space, and there are some great people working on this. So Blair Levin in Washington, D.C. is kind of, he understands the FCC. He worked there. The education superhighway folks are really looking at this every single day, and lots of other entities, Alliance for Excellent Education and others are very much focused on making sure that E-rate gets modernized in such a way that it actually advances the field in probably the most significant policy and funding way of the decade, for sure. Yes?
Karen, my question concerns unintended consequences. You mentioned the printing press a couple of times in your talk. The usually thing about the printing press is that it did indeed create and make possible an incredible expansion of content, and with it, literacy rates as well. But it had the unintended consequence of fixing errors. I mean, before the printing press, scribes made errors, but they were inconsistent. So no two scribes made the same mistake. With the printing press, those errors became fixed and actually changed the nature of content in ways that were unanticipated. So in your travels around the country over the past 5 years, in your thinking about digital promise, have there been any unintended consequences, things that you hadn't anticipated about the use of digital content or tools in education?
That's a really interesting question. And by the way, just on the printing press, I mean, this is precisely why this whole notion of textbooks should not be, I mean, this whole notion of this static thing that goes into the schools for 5 years or 7 years is completely a broken model. One of the things that we're working a lot on is procurement and the ways that we can advance the procurement cycles. We're working with multiple folks, and Steve Pine up here yesterday alluded to a project that we may be able to work on to really much better understand what's happening from your side and also from the customer side to better create systems, because our current systems were created for a print-based economy. Print-based economy. You buy something, it lasts for 5 years. You don't have to think about that again for 5 years. Now it's this rapid iteration, continuous improvement. It's a huge opportunity, but we can't kind of screw that up. Unintended consequences. So I did think of something as before I went off on the funding thing. So I will name one. I think there is a little bit of an unintended consequence on this whole conversation about blended learning, because I see part of the conversation of blended learning is moving us backwards to the lab down the hall. So I would say that anybody talking about blended learning we do not want to move that direction. We want to keep moving forward to getting a device in every student's hand so that learning is obviously and totally and completely a blended process. You have a question, you can look it up. You have an idea, you can record it. You have something you want to take a photo of. You've built this giant project, a robot, whatever. Take a picture of it. Write about it. We need to get to the point that every student has their own device. So part of this blended learning conversation, I fear, has an unintended consequence of taking us backwards. Yes?
My question isn't as serious as Nelson. It's more about serious games. Tyson Greer, Ambient Insight. I really concur with you about the explosion of products for the early childhood education. Pre-K through 3 in particular. And we found that 53% of the mobile learning products are edugames. Would you like to talk a little bit about the use of edugames also in the higher grades?
Also what?
In the higher grades, because it's so prevalent in the earlier grades.
So again, if we step back from the question and say, well, what's the basic research about how people learn? There's a bunch of research about incentives and feedback loops and giving people information about how they're doing. So this notion of gamification, right? So short of kind of looking at a full-on game, but this notion of gamification actually comes from something that we know about how people learn and advance and the kinds of things that bring you along. Even if you look at your LinkedIn profile, right? It's gamified. You do one more question and your little profile is, up to 63% complete or up to 78% complete or whatever. So this notion of gamification can be included in lots of things you're doing, not to make it cute and cool, but because it's grounded in basic research, right? So that's one thing. But the second thing is this engagement factor, right? So part of what we have to be careful about, and I walk down the street and see it all the time, somebody pushing a kid on the swing and looking at their phone like this. And I'm like, pocket the phone and focus on, the child in the swing. So this notion of engagement, I think, sort of comes naturally with the environment, with the digital environment. There's a lot of engagement going on there. And that's partly because of games. I mean, I play the games too, so pass the time on the subway or whatever. So games are incredibly powerful. And so I think focusing on basic learning, basic research on learning, and then also focusing on what is the outcome, like what is the outcome of this game, and making sure that the game revolves around that. There's just some totally amazing game environments that I've seen that hold tremendous promise for taking students where they are. Talk about an individual interaction, right? So taking students where they are and moving them forward. There's also the group games, the interactive games that develops kind of socialization and those kinds of things. There is somebody that I was talking with recently that's creating a game that develops social and emotional learning, and you get karma points as you go along so that if you do the right thing kind of thing. So there's just some tremendous promise with games. And Joan Gantz Cooney Center has done some very nice research on games and learning as well. Thank you.
Hi, Lisa.
Hi, Karen. How are you? I just thought you might talk a little bit about the Connected Educator project, which you were so involved with last year, which is going to continue in October. And there's so many organizations who can be part of that and assist that. So, how can we all help that happen on a regular basis so that educators become more digitally literate through those initiatives?
She had her second 30 seconds. That was good. Well done. No, so Connected Educator Month, so last year in August we ran something called Connected Educator Month. It comes from the chapter in the National Education Technology Plan. How many people have read the National Education Technology Plan? Oh, that's pretty good. About the same number of people that have been to EdNET at least 10 times, or whatever it was. So the it comes from the chapter on teaching that talks about how we need the highly connected teaching force. Teachers who are fully connected to the internet, to experts that can help them with this problem of practice today, that have the continuous development of their own personal learning network. Really, really powerful. And the teachers we talked with last year during Connected Educator Month that had these powerful personal learning networks, it's quite an advancement over a teacher who closes the door in their classroom and just really works with their kids, maybe reads something, maybe talks to the teacher next door. So advancing all of the ways that people can be fully connected online is what we wanted to focus on last August. So this October, the Department of Education is running it again, and what all of you can do is build out the base. You can, number one, leverage the fact that people are looking at all of these opportunities to learn online. You can promote something. You can do a book club. You can do a game. You can do a challenge. You can do a webinar. You can do any little thing, but post it on the Connected Educator website, and it becomes part of this whole sort of ecosystem of things happening through the month. So it's a huge spotlight demonstration project that everybody can participate in. It can be a little bit of a marketing opportunity for you, but it definitely is focused on how do we make sure that every teacher knows about all the ways that they can learn together online. Vicki.
Karen, I'm curious about what Digital Promise is doing in this area or thoughts you have for us. We know people in this room are working hard on moving things forward. We had that shared objective. Educators are working hard. I think a lot about how I think we've been remiss in telling our story to the community. We talk about the community as a stakeholder, but I don't know that we've done a very good job talking about 21st century learning environments or the realities of broadband teacher training, the problems in our schools. So are you working in that area, or what would you say to our audience about that?
Yeah, I would say that everybody stop talking about the problems and everybody find the positive things that you can say. The example of this school, and I don't mean, I'm not being Pollyanna at all. This is a marketing and communications scheme that many of you could design and develop. But we need to all get much better at saying it's working, because I hear too many people, even people who are highly connected and know a lot, say, people just don't know how to plan. They don't know how to implement. They don't know, how to do professional development. They don't know, all of these things. That may be true, but what we have to do in order to build public trust and public confidence is we need to start spotlighting the heck out of those places that are doing it well, so that we begin to talk about those, point to those, leverage those, support those. It's a community marketing and communications plan, and I think it's really, really important. What we're going to do with Digital Promise is we are launching something called Learnings from the League, and we're going to be publishing out not just, all of the stories from our districts and spotlighting what the superintendents are doing, really trying to support their work, but also show the world the kinds of even small things, like here's a professional development strategy that actually has worked in this district, things that other people will be able to curate and look at. And then we have a corporate partner program, so we'll also be spotlighting the kinds of things, white papers and webinars and new ideas and the kinds of things that corporate folks are also thinking about. Create this groundswell, create this ecosystem, create this we can do this kind of a platform, and you all can join on that platform. Again, obviously knowing and focusing on those things that are still not working to bring those up. So I'm not Pollyanna about it, not head in the sand, but focusing on the good things. Yes?
Karen, you've talked a lot about the role of the educator in the institution. We talked about equity as being an important issue. The third leg of that stool, what happens with the child and what happens in the school, is what happens in the home and family.
Yeah.
And building that sense of community also incorporates tying the family as stakeholders into the conversation. So what is Digital Promises activity, position, et cetera, on home learning as it is a continuum with what happens in the school?
I love that question because we have a huge opportunity in front of us. And many times when we think in the olden days, or when we used to talk about parental engagement, it was all about how do we get our parents to come to school? How do we get them to come to our back-to-school night? How do we get them to engage, come to parent conferences, come in and work with us? We have this totally amazing opportunity now to send learning home in the form of these devices with the entire internet, with the content, with the interactions, with the feedback loops. And what we know from many, many installations is that when that happens, we also are supporting the family. In many cases, it's the family's first home computer. It's their first opportunity to do their own work. And we've seen parents learning language, learning mathematics, finding information, learning how to use the technology themselves. So flipping from parent engagement being getting people to come in, and now thinking of all the ways that this device going home in the backpack can actually engage and build the digital literacy and confidence levels and help parents in very purposeful ways, parents and other family members in purposeful ways, is a tremendous opportunity and one that's very cool. It's sending, we've always talked about sending, books home and, one book, or whatever. But if we can send a whole plethora of books home on a tablet, every single book in the public domain can be available. So sending books to the home is an incredibly powerful practice, again, based on basic research.
Karen, it's not so much a question as asking for a comment. You've said several times that, assessment is, how do we broaden the view of assessment? Steve asked about unintended consequences. I think there have been some enormously negative unintended consequences tied up in our passion for assessment. Where do you see us going?
Yeah, so when I was at the department, I got in these assessment conversations, and this is a space that's very, very crazy-making because just this huge amount of effort and attention and focus is on a single summative assessment that we know doesn't necessarily help that much. In the best of all worlds, here's what we would have, and this is what I think we need to move towards. We need the kinds of feedback loops and data and information every single day that helps teachers, parents, and kids, students, know every day how they're doing. So that summative assessment is simply an audit. It might tell us something about the system as a whole, but that's not the place we're getting information about individual student learning. Because it's not the right time, the timing's wrong, the tests are not built that way. So much pressure has been put on that summative assessment that it's caused bad behavior, it's caused issues, all the issues. It's a huge problem. So what I would hugely ask everybody to do is constantly focus on all of those ways that the data you are providing for students, teachers, and parents every single day overtakes that test. So that test can go back in the corner and be where it should be, and that is simply an audit, a systems check, something that we can use to, Thank you. And on that note, I think we're out of time, but I really appreciate your work from the bottom of my heart. I think we have a ton of great work to do together. Huge, great time to be a learner. Really interesting time to be a teacher. I think we can do a better job of building up and supporting teachers. And thank you for all the products and services you build. Thanks.